course, there's educators that probably shouldn't be educators, but then there's also probably parents that shouldn't be parents. Hey, what's shaking? Welcome back to the All In Podcast. I'm Rick Jordan, your host. Today, my guest has been homeschooling for over a decade and has become one of the foremost experts in alternative, supplemental, and customized education. This is huge, especially coming out of the pandemic and a lot of remote schooling. But here's the cool thing. She's also founder and CEO of Brandlync, the co-founder of the Epic Companies and Mead Holdings Group, with a combined valuation topping $100 million, and has been featured alongside Richard Branson, Shaquille O'Neal, and in publications like Forbes, Entrepreneur, and Money Magazine. Jessica Mead, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So that was amazing when I was reading through your bio and just combining all those things, because you're just blowing the traditional like mom thing out of the water. It's amazing.
That's my goal. No, I don't think as a female that I ever set out thinking I'm going to blow it out of the water. I just have always been really sure of who I wanted to be and how I want to evolve and what I want to show my kids and my family and the women that work for me what can happen if you really put your all into it. So
that's so awesome, and you definitely have to with everything that you have going on. That's incredible. But homeschooling, right? We're coming through this pandemic right now, and my kids, if you want to call them homeschooled, they are. In essence, I mean, you go to homeschool.org or whatever it is, and it's Bridgeview Academy. I've talked about this a little bit on the show here and there. It's not to where parents are really fully involved to where they're teaching their kids at home. And we started this with our kids prior to the pandemic, to where just because I saw some flaws with the public education system and for example, even my son and my daughter, they're in theater companies outside of school itself because it's just what they want to do. My eldest son's PE, he's a competitive swimmer, 1.5 hours a week, 5 times a week. He's in a club that trains people for the Olympics. It's really cool, the opportunities that they have, and it's not even financially speaking, it's not even as much as like legitimate like private school or traditional private school. It's incredible because there's some live Zoom classes, but then there's also self-paced things with videos. It's incredible to see them learn this way. What method are you using to homeschool your kids, or are you like hands-on?
So I'm really hands-on. For me, let me back up. I think it's extremely important to really get a grasp on your child's learning style and what that means. So for example, my son, Jackson, he's a multiple of things. He's kinesthetic, he's social, he's a naturalist, he's more auditory. And so by knowing these things with him, I'm able to kind of create this school of sorts, this curriculum based on his interests. So I practice with my kiddos because it suits them best in interest-based, project-based type learning, meaning all that we do is centered around their interest at the moment. And that changes whatever it happens to be. Like right now, my kiddo, Jackson, he really wants to be a zoologist, a seaplane pilot. He wants to take over his dad's companies. He's got all of these things, right? And so I base everything around that. And then I do it in a project-based way. So where each subject is integrated with one another.
I love that. So in essence, both you and I, it sounds like, are really looking for the same outcome with our kids, is to center their education around their desires and interests.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Public school teachers, it's amazing some of the things that they go through, but then we've also had people on the show who are saying maybe some of them shouldn't be teachers because, you look at one of my films this past year, Liberty Lockdown, was about the government lockdowns and the overreach. And when you saw what some of the kids had to go through, because some of these educators just did not understand, even like you're talking about, how kids actually learn. So when they shifted to remote learning and in these Zoom classrooms, teachers were getting pissed at the students just because they were getting distracted, but they're not understanding their new environment of being at home. And sometimes it's a small apartment, especially in inner city areas to where they're on and now the dog runs across the Zoom screen, and now they get distracted. Of course they're going to get distracted.
I have so much to say about that. So I'll try to just sum it up. It was so frustrating for me. So here in LA, I got asked, like the day LA announced that they were going to shut down the schools, they asked me to come on and they're like, what are some tips for parents? And I honestly panicked for these children because so many children, especially here in the LA school district, they rely on school for resources, not just food, but shelter and love and a safe space. And so I think
even daycare so the parents can work.
Absolutely. A lot of families work 2 jobs. So we don't know the life that these children are living at home, but also the resources that are available to them. So a lot of these kids, they went for months before they figured out how to actually feed them. Because probably over half these kids, it's that one meal a day they get at school. So there are so many bigger factors to this and so extremely frustrating. My best friend is an educator, a high school educator, and she couldn't get these kids to do anything. Like they wouldn't do anything. And then a lot of them was they didn't have internet, they didn't have access. So then school districts realized we have to figure out a way to get them access. And they just really did not think it through in the way they should. And they also didn't educate and train the teachers. I mean, you got to think about it. These teachers had to completely change the way they educate. They had to completely rewrite everything that they're going to do with their students in a way that they could deliver it to them so that they can do it on their own and at home. And a lot of kids don't learn that way. So I think what we saw and what we are seeing is a lot of kids are going to be really behind because they basically got nothing for whether it was 6 months, a year. I think here in LA, we're just now going back to school. In Washington, I think we have a home there. They're just about to go back to school. But like in Texas, they started in January. And I mean, these kids, there's no self-motivation, no drive. It's a big thing that is just going to be devastating for so many children and for educators for a long time.
No doubt. And you're right when you say for both of those, there are really two sides to the coin, because of course there's educators that probably shouldn't be educators, but then there's also probably parents that shouldn't be parents. I'm just throwing out a straight truth on this, right?
Yes. Yes.
I did a segment on bullying. I mean, I was even in LA, I was in top 10 markets with this on TV on the ethics of bullying. And one of the things that I saw with parents, from like the psychology is I felt bad for the educators and for the administrators, because it's like parents would almost abdicate their responsibility to parent their kids and just depend on the educators to actually guide them through these scenarios in life. That actually got me kicked off of Las Vegas TV when I was there. When I said that, yeah. But the superintendent of the Las Vegas, of the Henderson School District, was on right after me on the station out there. Yeah, but he was like, he's like, oh, that's right. I'm like, I'm getting their backs, But then it was just too strong of a stance for the viewers that the viewers got pissed, when I was getting the stance of the educator, but it really is both sides, So with this remote learning stuff, it's almost like some educators were abdicating their responsibility in their job to do what's right for the kids, but then parents too, not from the daycare perspective, but that they depend on it for resources like you're saying, but they were saying, well, shoot, where's my source of parenting now? And how do I do that? And now they're thrown into the scenario. It's like, well, you should have been parenting your kid the whole time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've talked a lot about the difference between concerted cultivation versus natural growth and how that shapes children and how families basically grow their kids. And I think in both circumstances, you see a healthy number of parents that they rely completely on school to educate and sort of mold their child.
Yeah, to instill values that are not even their own.
Right. And I mean, one of the coolest parts about homeschooling to me is you're not on anybody's schedule. You don't have to recreate traditional school in your home. And, if they have extreme hobbies or interests. I know a family who their little kiddos are really big into ice skating. The daughter just competed at the Junior Olympics again. And I mean, homeschooling for them gives them freedom to pursue those interests, but also she's still getting a solid education in the mix. So I hate that I got pulled onto so many things and like, can you tell us how to homeschool during this pandemic? And I'm like, well, first, I think you need to understand that what's happening is distance learning. It's not homeschooling. If it was homeschooling, it'd be completely different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I can get on my soapbox on many things. So I'll try to rein it in.
There's a stigma, that homeschoolers are socially awkward too. And I have seen this mindset across the world, because when I was telling everybody this is what I'm going to do with my kids, and they're like, oh, don't do that because they're going to have development problems, social development problems. When to the contrary, because I've done things like integrate them. I mean, my oldest son and I always think back to pre-pandemic days, July 4th. So I guess that was 2019. So he would have been 11 at the time. He went out to my branding agency at the time. We were dropping some podcasts out there in the studio, and we were hanging out with Naveen Jain, who's a tech billionaire, has a space program. So
I know him.
Yeah, he's awesome. I mean, we were watching fireworks with him, and we had dinner with him and Dave Asprey. And my oldest son was having a conversation with Naveen, and then Naveen comes up to me afterwards. He goes, "I didn't know kids that age could be that coherent." Like, homeschooled and not socially awkward.
Well, there you go. Yep, I get that all the time. So here's the thing. The same stigma can be said about kids who grew up as an only child, right? Like, how did they socialize? How did they get that interaction? But I actually believe it's quite the opposite, because homeschooling children, only child, they've actually trained themselves to be more self-motivated, self-starters. They engage with people at just every opportunity, and their vocabulary and comprehension is just incredible. So think about this. Where do humans interact and connect the most? In areas of interest. So if you think about the conversation that you've had, what have been most natural to you? It's likely that it was areas where you've had a commonality or a common interest with that other person. And kiddos get this from, they develop these social skills from things like with your son, like swimming, soccer, dance, theater, scouts, science programs at museums, wherever that is. It's not typically at school. So the idea that they're not going to a school and they're going to be these, dysfunctional social interactors just blows my mind. I mean, people that meet my son, he's 9 now, they're like, he's like talking to an adult with a better vocabulary. Like, he just blows my mind.
Yep. It's always been the same, even with my youngest, who's 11 now. But, ever since he was 6 and 7 years old, the things that would come out of his mouth would just blow the minds of any adult that's around. But it's because of this too. Yeah, you're talking about the socialization in public schools. Where really do they have the opportunity to socialize outside of lunch hour?
Lunch,
or the 5
recess,
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And oftentimes she talks about bullying earlier. And I think it really is one of the big reasons that parents pull kids out, especially starting in junior high or high school. I know so many families that have pulled their kiddos out because bullying was the main factor. And, you don't deal with that when you're homeschooling, and you're putting kids with like-minded kids. If you do something like a co-op or group classes outside of it to add on, these kids are like-minded kiddos, or usually are. And you cut that out. So you don't have to deal with the bullying aspect of it.
Right on. It's so awesome too, because now, if my daughter's in theater and she makes friends with the theater company, which by the way is audition only to get in, so now it's not just anybody can sign up. It's actually, hey, you have to put in the work to even be a part of this, which instills some good responsibility in any age of a child. But then she forms friends in theater company. And then she's like, I want to see my friends. I'm like, cool, text them, just ride your bike to Starbucks. Here's my Starbucks gift card, go for it. It's real socialization,
Sure. And you're comfortable with it. And that it's taking her in the direction that's going to help her grow both mentally and emotionally, because she's making the right connections, not being thrown in with kids that, could possibly harm her in some way.
You got it right on. So with homeschool students, how do you feel that they have the upper hand in life when it comes to socialization?
Well, I mean, I what I have witnessed with homeschooling kids, especially ones that are going off into college, if that's the path that they choose, I think they get picked over a lot of other kids because they are self-starters. They are self-driven. They've had to manage their time. I think they're willing to spark a conversation and make a connection, and they know how to do it in a more meaningful way because they've had to do that along the way. They've had to learn how to interact, especially with adults. Like if your teacher is your mom or your dad or your aunt, or you do co-op classes and the parents take turns with it. You're not just a student sitting in a class listening to a teacher and not being required to engage. When it's that one-on-one or three-on-one type of interaction, you have to have a voice. You have to speak up. You have to use your words. You have to have manners. I mean, there's so many things that are required with it that make these children just inspired, incredible humans, once they get into adulthood.
That's awesome. Let's get into some of the mechanics, if you could, because there's a lot of there is a movement right now. Would you agree more towards homeschooling, especially coming out of yeah?
It excites me and it scares me.
Yeah, same here in a lot of ways. One, because I don't know if a lot of parents necessarily know what they're getting into yet. And understand the requirement that they have to have in this, from responsibility of time, in essence, depending on which way they choose. Because the way that I go with my kids, there's a lot less time involved from the adults because it really is like a private school just online. It's different.
I know what you're talking about. I've heard of that one. We have supplemented sometimes with a school called Laurel Springs. I'm familiar with Laurel Springs. So we have used that for certain classes, or like the friend I was telling you about, that's an educator, her daughter homeschooled for about 1.5 years, and they did the science courses on there together. And I got all of the manipulatives, like the microscopes and everything that they needed, because they did labs together. And she would actually fly out here from Texas and they'd spend like 2 weeks on it, real immersive. Fun. And then, So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So in there's a little less responsibility that I would say that I have from what you do. It's just the route that we chose to go with our kids because it fits our life for integration. But do you have, because this will help the parents, I'm sure, do you have a certain type of schedule or morning routine or something like that to help your kids and that helps you?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, so when I get up, okay, so let me back up. I'm kind of a unique person because I've had a decade to sort of work this out. So I can give you my routine and I'm just going to be straight. It didn't fall into this flawlessly at the begining. I mean,
it sucked at the beginning, didn't it? Oh my God, let's be real. Okay. It sucked.
Yeah, no, there were days where, so it started with my daughter who's now 16. And by the way, she's done with high school. But
Bam, did you hear that? 16 and done with high school. Yep.
Yeah. Oh man, this girl would blow your mind. But she also is into theater and music and things like that. But then she has all these other interests. And I'll get back to what you asked me. But the coolest part about homeschooling children is there's nobody there crushing their dreams or their goals, telling them to think real or be realistic. Here's the path you need to follow. So you do this, this, and this, and then you get to live your life. They get to create it, and they still get to believe that they can do anything and be anything. And we have the capacity to ignite that in them. So to me, that's one of the cooler things of it. But morning routine now versus when I started, because there were days where we'd start our day and I would be like, you know what? We're both crying. We're about to quit this day and start all over again tomorrow.
And that's okay too.
That's okay. Yes. It happens, that's the way it goes. And I think parents need to show themselves and their children a little grace and mercy when it comes to that, because that's going to happen in life. But morning routine for me is, so I get up and it actually starts the night before. I make a list. I make a personal and professional list of what I need to accomplish the next day. And I always prioritize that list. So I put the big thing, the thing I really don't want to do at the top, and I make sure I get that done first. Usually that's in business. So I spend my morning from about 6:30, 7 o'clock until about 10:30. And that is my window to work with my companies and get my time. So I'm very bullish on my time and how I manage that time. But then I switched to my kiddos, but my kiddos is sort of they're night owls. And so they don't get up usually until about 10 o'clock. And now that my daughter is 16, she kind of gets up, hangs out with her brother. I'm done by 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then we start our day together. So that's kind of how we do that. But I get up every morning and I kind of do some self-talk, motivate myself. I'm my own best hype person. And I think about something I tell people to take with them, children and employees. I changed one of the words for employees, but to wake up every day and put your courage, confidence, curiosity, and love in your pocket and know what's required with each of those words for you for the day, and implement that. And with my employees, instead of love, I use a different word, but it's so important to kind of have that time for myself in the morning and get myself going, get my work handled. And then I get the rest of the day with my kiddos. And I do follow up about 3 o'clock. I follow up with my work again for about an hour.
That's cool. That's a good rhythm for work too. Just in general, I would have to say to anybody who's an entrepreneur or just in business, when I do that, when I travel with my kids, because it's one way that I integrate, my daughter just flew to Florida to meet me this past Friday. And we just hung out.
We were just in Florida.
Were you?
Yeah.
Great state. Fantastic. Yeah. And we won't get on that political soapbox, but no. But yes, I've done this a lot to where they've spent some days with me there. I've been down there on business. One kid, I do this every year. One kid will fly to meet me. They've been doing that since they were 7 years old. All of them since they were that young. And we would set up a pattern to where I would do the same thing. I would work in the mornings until about 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then we would just go have fun, whether it's at Disney or Universal, whatever. But then I'd come back at night, because we're not those hardcore park people. We just like to chill and actually relax a little bit. So then I'd come back to yes, I would just come back to that work at night, and this even goes to like some European cultures. Like that's literally where the word siesta came from. Is this middle of the day break for those who are in work. And it's pretty cool because I hear from what you're saying that you're filling it with the time for homeschooling to be with your kids and help them achieve their goals.
I am, because, I think once you start homeschooling and you quit fighting the idea that you have to mimic school, like public or private school, and you kind of really pay attention to your child, what hours of the day they learn best. Like Jackson, he has to, about every 30 minutes, if we're working on something, he takes a little dance break, a trampoline break, he zip lines, he's rolling around in the grass. It doesn't matter. He's got that break. So we have a lot of dance parties in our family, but he, paying attention to how they learn their time. So with my children, I know the best time of the day. I know when to engage with them and to get the most out of them. And also with homeschooling, I know it's a little different for you, but if you're doing it my way, you don't have to spend 8 hours teaching them. It's not required, especially with little kids. You need maybe 2 hours. With my daughter, it was about 3 hours a day. And she loves to teach him as well. So there's a lot of that integration with her teaching him. But I don't know if you saw anything on my profile, but we're a big Disney family and I am a big Disney mom. So we were just there. Matt and I were speaking at this thing in Miami, and then we went up to Disney for about 5 days. And that's how we do it. We work in the morning. The kiddos know we'll leave for the park around 11:30, 12 o'clock. We'll have some lunch, have a little fun. And then, yes, I like it.
It's a great rhythm, isn't it? It's pretty fantastic.
Oh, yeah. And it works for us. That may not work for everybody. I know people who, their kiddos get up at, 6 o'clock and they're ready to do that. And they just change their day up. So if their kid learns best from 7 to 10, that's their time to work with their kid. And then I always get asked, well, if you're working from home right now, how do you manage that with younger children or even just, kids that are, your age? And I get them involved in what I'm doing. It's so important to let kids know. We try to separate our children, our family, our spouse, our business from our home life. We separate everything in this way to where it's like we have to be 20 different people. And it's one of the questions that you had sent out, but it's called intentional congruence. And that's kind of what we practice. And we came by it organically because we would try something and it wouldn't serve us. So I always say, shed what's not serving you. If it didn't serve us in our family or in our business life, then we would shed it. And so it's finding this harmony where it all works together. And one of the ways is even in a small way, if you're at home and you're a graphic designer, show your kids what you're working on. Maybe boring. It may be something that's not as super cool that you're designing, but show them what it means and how you can do cool things when Photoshop or InDesign or whatever program you're in, but just involve them in some way, get them excited and understand it. They also become very mindful and respectful of your time. So then you can say, instead of saying, mommy's working right now, I need you to leave me alone. It's like, hey, mommy's working. Want to see what I'm working on? And guess what? I'm going to need 35 more minutes to finish this task. So, you want to sit here and watch me maybe draw next to me, and try to create what I'm creating. There's so many ways to involve our kids and make it find this harmony that works.
Right on. My oldest son now is starting to do some video editing. Even for the show, he's learning how to use Adobe Premiere and Adobe Audition. Yeah. And then my daughter is actually starting to try her hand at copywriting, which is also kind of fun too, because she enjoys, the stuff that she writes in her imagination is just incredible. It's like, cool. Would you like to give this a shot? See how this goes, even for, Ashley, who also were developing her brand to coincide with the Rick Jordan brand. It's pretty fun. So she's doing some things there too for like moms in business and all that. And then my youngest son, when he saw this, who's 11, he's like, Dad, do you have a job for me too? Oh yeah. So he's seeing the interest in this, and just saying, hey, how can I jump in? It's awesome.
And that's the best kind of relationship too that you can build, is so that creates that awareness and they feel involved and then they get excited, and you never know where that's going to take them. Their future is so wide open because you, like us, probably parent with there are no boundaries, there are no ceilings. Dream as big as you can, go as hard as you can, because why not? Who's telling you different?
Yeah, for sure. I love that. So there's a stat. You ready for this? That homeschool students consistently test 30% higher than national public school average in all subjects tested. And I see that, and I don't know how you feel, but I'm just like, duh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Oddly enough, that's one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, how do you know they're doing good? Do you test them, or do you have the test to show? And we here in our Western civilization, we have this crazy attachment to testing, all these standardized tests and everything. And I get it. And, I won't get into how I feel about it, but rather than constantly testing them and grooming them to test so that the school districts get more money because the test scores are higher, it'd be wise to start focusing on really dedicated education and making sure that these kids are walking away with real, life skills and usable skills. Really, it's so frustrating for me, but I do test my kids. It's not a test that I give them. It's an outside test, and they've always scored way above. Isabella was scoring out of high school in, I think 7th, 8th grade, because and it's centralized learning. So it's that condensed learning. In a classroom, you have 30 kids, and the teacher is up there. She or he has to get their attention, has to get them engaged. They're able to cover something, but what they cover in that hour-long class, it may have taken me 10, 15 minutes to cover. The other thing we do is if we're really interested in something, we can stay on it as long as we want. In school, they have to move past it. They can't hover. They can't stay. They can't linger in that space until everybody has comprehension. So a lot of kids, they just never get it.
I'm with you on that for sure. My kids in the version of homeschooling, I keep doing the air quotes for those that are watching.
Yeah, but it's homeschooling. Yeah.
It is, yeah. They do have tests, and it's interesting because I know that the real thing that I care about is if they're actually grasping and learning the information. I care so much less about the actual test scores. But at the same time, it's almost like they're an indicator of some sort. So this was one of those, during like the first 3 months that we dove into this, that was like the suck period to where we were trying to figure things out, but then it was like, okay, there's a D on a unit exam here. Okay, why did you get the D? But then it just became a hard and fast rule that if you get lower than 80% on anything, you've got to text your teacher. And this is so cool because they can text their teachers too and set up, whatever meeting they want. That's fine. And then go back and review what you missed and why. So then they still get that support to learn things. And most of the time they'll get A's and B's. But you know what? If they still get a C on it after working with their teacher, I don't really care because maybe they just didn't take the test. Because I know my daughter, if she, at least back when in second grade and third grade, this was in the public school system, when she would see test questions on a computer, now she would learn on paper, but then their testing went to computer. And my argument with that school district and the administration was you're testing them in a format that they're not learning in. So how can you move and expect the brain to process that? I mean, I'm no educator, but I understand from running businesses that it's completely different parts of the brain, going from pen and paper and handwriting things to taking something on a screen. It's processed differently. So she couldn't make that transition over and very easily. And then on the screen, she would see, like all 50 tests or questions on the test and have to scroll through it. And it was just more overwhelming for her. So now you can even set it up to where you can just look at one question at a time on these things, and that helps her process better.
Sure. Well, testing is really like a check mark for comprehension, but it's flawed because not all kids are good testers. I mean, if we take my daughter Isabella, for example, if you put her on the spot or you have her take a test on something, I mean, she clams up, she freaks out, and it could be she could have complete clarity on whatever it is, but she's not going to do well. And that's the thing with learning styles. And you brought up even with business, it's important to know. I mean, I know the learning styles of all my employees across all the companies. I pay attention to these things. So I know how to communicate with them and how to get the most out of them and how to push them and see that they're thriving and moving forward inside our walls. This is the same thing with children. We can't assume that they don't necessarily have the comprehension just because they didn't take a test well. Funny thing is I get asked that too, like, how do I keep grades and what do I do with that? And honestly, I don't give grades on anything because I'm there with them and I understand their comprehension. I don't need something to say, check, I know that they understand this because I'm seeing it and observing this every day. But in that situation, and same with like Laurel Springs, it's nice that they have the teacher there and they can go back to the teacher and have that private one-on-one, like Zoom type thing if they needed it, to make sure that the clarity is there and that they're grasping it. So there's good in all different ways of homeschooling. The other thing you had asked me about, obviously, of how to approach it and things to think about outside of the learning styles, I would say figuring out what type of homeschooling you want to do. We've talked a lot about how you do it versus how I do it, but there's so many different styles out there, from unschooling to Sudbury to Waldorf to, there's so many. How I do it, project interest-based versus an online type of thing. So I think finding what works best for the family is really, really key. And then, like you said earlier, how does it work with the time? How are we going to integrate this and still have a good flow and harmony in our family? And also, if we're working, both parents are working, how do we make that work?
Yeah, that's another conundrum too. Yeah, but especially if both parents are working, that was something I thought of in my head, because that's not the case, because a lot of times this burden falls on the mom. It just does. It's just how society is. And if you have to have a double income home, then it becomes more of a challenge too, especially if. But I guess it's even maybe a little bit easier nowadays because it depends, I guess, on the job that you have. I mean, if you're working from home because of the remote workers, just like there's remote learning now, there's a lot of remote workers that exist because of this post-pandemic Zoom era that we're in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a lot of employees working at home, especially here in California.
For sure. But if you're working from home as like a customer service rep for Comcast or something like that, You're expected to be online taking calls during a certain period, or United Airlines, I swear everybody, or Marriott, everybody I talked to at the ambassador desk is sitting in their pajamas,
Us too.
Yes.
I feel like we're a lot alike. We're ambassador elite members with Marriott. And, I feel the same way. I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah. They sound a lot more chill than what they used to,
Yes. They're very comfortable.
Right on. Like, oh, no problem, Mr. Jordan. You know what? I'm just going to email the hotel for you. I'm going to call them right now. I'll get back to you in a little bit. Like, are you doing anything else today?
I'm your number one priority, it sounds like.
Exactly. Right on. So there's another thing that maybe we can finish off our conversation with this, is the age to start your kids in homeschooling. Now, I'll give you my experience, please, and then if you could give me yours, because it's about the right age. And one thing I noticed with my kids was I felt like with my older two, because they're twins, so they're 13 now, but when they were 11 is when they started with. So we've been doing this 2 years, not a decade like you, but 2 years. And I felt like with them, there was a lot of things we had to break as far as habits and such from the public school system. Like it was actually more difficult for them than it was for, at the time, my 9-year-old. Just because they had been in it longer. My 9-year-old still was only in grade school, like that K through 5 age. And then my older two had already gotten into 6th grade at that point, or about to start 6th grade. So it's a different scenario for both of them. And I felt like it was easier for my younger one, even though it was just 2 years, to adapt at age 9 versus the 11-year-olds. What experience do you have? And do you feel there is a better time to start your kids in homeschooling than another?
So I'll give you my experience, because my children were a little bit different. So with Isabella, at the time we lived in Texas, and what we were involved in at that moment, we had restaurants, and we were developing the first Mexican delivery franchise back when there wasn't Uber Eats and all of these things, right? This is, back in like 2007, 2006, 2007. And then we were still doing publishing. And I also owned prior to that I had just sold off with some indoor playgrounds. So we were pretty busy. So when it came time for her to start school, homeschooling wasn't the first thing I thought of. It wasn't. But also, I'm the oldest of 7, so I have a lot of experience with public school. And although public school served me well, it didn't serve some of my siblings well. And so I knew that I wanted something different for her. Put a lot of time into it, found a really cool, super, super cool school called the Lab School in Clear Lake, Texas. If that school was around, I think, I would have put my son there for his first few years. But she started there. And there was 8 kids in the classroom, open doors. The mindset and the way they approached education, it was very hands-on. They gardened, they cooked, they did everything. So really loved the approach to education with this school. But, we had that recession. And so when it came time for her to go into 2nd grade, they called me and said, well, we don't have enough enrollment. And so you're going to have to either homeschool her or put her in school. And this was August. And I don't know if you know much about private schools or even private schools in Texas. It's like a game, right? You have to start applying in December, January to get your child in. So here I am, middle of August. I'm pregnant. My son was born August 29th. So you know how pregnant I am. And my grandma was living in our home full care. She had had a stroke and had come to live with us, had lived with us for almost a year. So I panicked. I was crying. I was panicking. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this child. I'm going to screw up if I homeschool. And Kay said to me, the lady that owned the lab school, she's like, look, just breathe. She's a brilliant child. You could basically do nothing but play with her for the next year and she won't be behind. And I'm like, play with her. She's like, you don't understand what children get out of play. And we cut that off. And we're under this idea that kids, once they go to school, that's when like their brain kicks in and they actually start learning, but they're learning from the moment they're born. They're learning and observing and learning how to adapt, and they become these resilient little human beings, right? So I'm like, okay, all right. So for like 3 months, we did nothing because I didn't know what to do. And I actually started her in Laurel Springs. We did Laurel Springs for a year. And I felt like we fought the whole year. It was the worst experience for me. I'm like, why? I took school, traditional school, not even the school she was doing at the lab school. And I brought it into my home. And I had, we were up at this time and doing all this. I had every moment scheduled. I had her 8.5 hours. It was the worst thing I'd ever done. So I did that for a year. And then I realized, okay, I have to really understand how to educate my child. Fortunately, for me, I've always been extremely aware of my children and how they're developing. So I knew her learning styles early on. So that wasn't a challenge for me, but I had to educate myself on a lot of it so that I could be the right kind of teacher for her. And then so from second grade on, I've been homeschooling her. Now, when Jackson came time for him to go to school, there was no question we were going to homeschool him from the beginning, because we had this incredible opportunity to allow his imagination and creativity to keep blooming. I mean, for a while, he thought that he was a wolf that lived on Mars, lived with Helen Cavallo, the cooking lady from the Disney Channel, and they had like 97 children, right? And if he goes to school, people are going to go, that's dumb. You're not a wolf. You don't have a wolf pack. They kind of kill that so early, and they're taught to conform, sit down, be quiet, listen, only talk when you're, all of these kind of rules and this hidden curriculum. I talk about hidden curriculum a lot because it's a thing that we have to be aware of as parents, whether we keep our kids in public, private school or not, what they're teaching our kids about life and about becoming human beings. So you have to really pay attention to those things. For me, I would say if you have the capacity to homeschool, I would homeschool from the beginning. You get to create this life and this education path with your child that is unparalleled and that will benefit them leaps and bounds. For Matt and I, we're trying to raise global citizens. Our kiddos have been to 29 countries. We have the freedom to travel with them. We can take them. We can be gone for months and work from anywhere. They're learning about cultures. They're learning diversity, learning about all the religions, not just the ones, that are pressed upon them usually by parents. So we're real open with that. They're learning different languages. They're inspired to do that naturally, not something that, okay, well, now you're in high school, you have to take 2 years of a foreign language. My kiddos have done it since little. I mean, they talk to each other in French. Right now they're teaching each other Mandarin. They taught each other sign language. I mean, there's so many cool things about it. So many opportunities that are missed when you give your child away for 8 hours a day.
Man, that's huge. I appreciate all that. So what advice would you have then? And we could leave it this way to women, especially women, because like we said, it falls mostly on them for the most part, especially those with a family right now, that are maybe trying to make this transition. What advice would you have for them when they're just thinking about homeschooling, if it's right for them?
So I would say don't be scared. Don't be scared to consider it. I know from experience with families that it's a little daunting to go to your spouse, especially if you're working as well, and say, hey, I feel like maybe we should consider homeschooling our children. It's a hard conversation to have because then the immediate thought is, do you have time? What are we sacrificing? Yeah. So I think with
your spouse, it's a hard conversation, right?
Yeah. It's a really hard conversation. And you wouldn't think that, but it really becomes complicated because I think we put all of these expectations on the men in our life. They're supposed to be the providers. They're supposed to handle all the finances. They're supposed to be the solid one that keeps everything in line. And women kind of take this step back role to that. I feel like along with homeschooling, women should also be involved in the finances and all of that in their personal life, understand their debt, their good debt, their bad debt. See so many women who have no clue how their household is run. They just do things like buy groceries. They don't even pay bills. And so one of the things we work really hard on with our children is financial literacy. And I think it's important both for the kiddos and the woman in the family to work on this. But, I would say be fearless with your intention. And don't feel like you have to compromise your career for the homeschooling or homeschooling for the career. I mean, you've seen how I work it out. There are ways to work it out. Don't think that you have to give up, your entire day for it. And there is education in every single thing that you do. If you really think about it, we don't wake up and say, okay, well, today I'm going to spend 1 hour on gaining knowledge. We're gaining knowledge all throughout the day through conversations we have. I've learned things just by talking to you. It's so easy with children to find real moments and nuggets of knowledge throughout even playing games, cooking, measuring. My kids write the grocery list. They know the cost of different things. There's so many ways to incorporate education that they're probably already doing and they don't even realize it. And I would say also to really track your time and see where you can move things around. I give this advice to business people all the time. It's like, I have this side hustle and I really want to know, how do I do both? I feel like I'm giving one up for the other, or I'm sacrificing. Track your time, see where you're giving your time away to time bandits, see what you're doing with your time. Are you constantly on your phone? Are you distracting yourself from yourself because, you don't know where to move to next or how to adequately delegate your time or responsibilities to other people in your life? I mean, there's so many little things we can do, but track that time, figure out where you're wasting it, what you could do with it. And be bullish about that, and then also be flexible. If you're trying to set a schedule, know that the first time is not always going to work. You're going to have to try and try again. Like with me, I mean, I cried, we were angry with each other. I'm trying to, manage all these catering orders for the restaurants and do my part there. And we had 5, and then also educate my kid. And I'm like, oh, but I got to educate my kids starting at 8:30, we put these expectations on ourselves and we're not realistic about the opportunity we have with our time. So I would say, that's the main one. And then also schedule and joy. I think the thing we do as moms who start homeschooling and we're also working, we overschedule ourselves to the point where we don't have any joy throughout the day. We don't schedule in breaks. One of the things I do for myself is mostly in business, but if I know that I need to have my head in a certain place for something I'm walking into, and what I just walked out of really had me in a different kind of zone, I give myself 5 or 10 minutes. I hype myself up, turn on a favorite song. Right now it's Sunday's Best. I listen to it. I kind of clear my head. I think about what I need to bring to this next meeting or task that I'm about to do so I can bring my full self. And I think women tend to do that. We think we have to be these massive multitaskers who can do anything and be everything because we're mom and we're a business person. We're super cool and we can do everything, but we don't allow ourselves any space or any grace or moments to find joy. Have lunch with your kids every day to make sure that, and don't bring in business or education or anything else. Just sit there and talk about the ups and downs for the day. Find ways to do that, because otherwise we're just taking all the good parts out of ourselves.
That's fantastic. I tell you, you are a superwoman, no joke, because there's a lot that you've figured out. I don't think it's not lost on me. I hope it's not to everybody listening or watching either, that this has taken 10 years for you to figure out too.
Oh yeah.
But you look back, and I remember those days of the suck. Also, when we started this journey, we're only 2 years into it, but you can make big strides and you can make them fast as long as you're just not committed to having it perfect on day one. I think that's true to pretty much everything: relationships, business, homeschooling, whatever. Just commit to making the strides and moving forward in progress, not having it perfect on day one. Jessica Mead, you're amazing.
Oh, thank you. You as well. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone go to jessicamead.com, MEAD.com, and follow her. She's got a lot of amazing things on her site too. Thank you for being on. What's shaking? Thank you for joining me on the All In Podcast. Click the subscribe button and smash that bell for notifications. Text me, 312-535-8520. Follow me on social media at Mr. Rick Jordan. See you next episode. I am Rick Jordan, and I approve this message.